But that's why what I'm bringing to Washington, D.C. is mass layoffs, because the civil service protections do not apply on their own terms to mass layoffs.
Hi, everybody. Auntie speaks. Woo! Vivek Ramaswamy. He was on Timcast IRL. Full clip is down below. Please support Timcast. He's awesome. But Vivek goes for the jugular. He outlines how we got this huge bureaucracy, and he outlines how he is going to destroy it.
Rather, these two IRS agents were able to say or testify to the fact that the DOJ did intentionally slow walk their investigation and treated Hunter the way no one else would get to be treated. We make special exceptions for him.
Well, I mean, I think there are definitely two standards of justice in this country right now.
Amen.
And this is not specific to Biden and Trump alone. So then now you see one standard for Hunter Biden, a different one for somebody who has a different last name, be it Trump or otherwise. Part of the problem is we have this bureaucracy. The IRS is one example of it, but a bureaucracy that really abandons the rule of law to decide what it feels like doing on a given day. And so those two stories between what Marjorie Taylor Greene's saying about Hunter Biden, about the testimony of the two IRS whistleblowers, these are deeply linked. They're both symptoms of a managerial class, a bureaucracy in this country that does whatever it sees fit and is going to effectively politically protect whichever party is actually protecting them and preserving them. And
wow. A managerial class that ignores the rule of law and will do whatever it takes to protect itself. Doesn't he make it sound like a monster? Like it's, you know that old movie, The Blob?
Every one of you watching this screen, look out. Because soon, very soon, the most horrifying monster menace ever conceived will be oozing into this theater.
Yeah? Like it's a monster that has no feeling, no thought. All it's going to do is consume you. Now Vivek is going to talk about how he plans to dismantle it brick by brick.
But what I'd like to ask you is, if you were elected president, what would you do to dismantle these bureaucracies, and what would you do to ensure that there weren't two different tracks within the justice system?
yeah, so I think that a lot of Republicans end up making a false promise without knowing that they're making a false promise. They think it's a true promise. They'll say, we're going to come in and reform the bureaucracy.
Yeah, good luck.
It is impossible,
Yeah.
right? Because this is a beast. It's like a creation, a monster unto itself that existed long before we arrived, as somebody who ever got elected, and long after we're gone. And so I'm not going to make that false promise to say that I can reform that bureaucracy. But what the president can do is actually shut it down. And I think this is where, even Trump, who was the closest we ever got to at least identifying this problem, stopped short, because the traditional wisdom is that there are these things called civil service protections, which say that members of the bureaucracy cannot be fired absent some extreme finding of misconduct. Actually, if you read the rules carefully, it doesn't work that way. The way it works is you can't fire individuals, right? You can't have backlash against, any one individual in that bureaucracy at one at a time. But that's why what I'm bringing to Washington, D.C. is mass layoffs, because the civil service protections do not apply on their own terms to mass layoffs.
Guys, if you like my content, please like, comment, subscribe, and turn on the bell. It helps me out quite a bit.
What would you replace it with?
So it depends on what the it is. If the it is the Department of Education, I'm not going to replace it with anything.
Amen. If
the it is the FBI, I'm going to shut it down and I'm not going to replace it with anything. A lot of those functions are already being performed by the U.S. Marshals, by the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency. And so you go on down the list, that's the reality. There are certain other functions like, that you would say have to continue to exist in some form. Say the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I said I would shut that down because we haven't had a nuclear power plant built in this country in 35 some odd years because the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is fundamentally hostile to it. In that case, I think you can't reform the culture of that agency. you have to shut it down, but we'd rebuild from scratch an agency that was actually committed to a rational evaluation of the risks and benefits of a given nuclear power plant. So some cases shut it down, it stays shut down. Certain cases you shut it down and then rebuild something skeletal from scratch to perform the basic function. And then certain other agencies, let's talk about the FDA, let's talk about the SEC, let's talk about the U.S. Federal Reserve. I'm talking about a 75% layoff of the people who already work there, and that, I think, will get the job done.
I know what you're going to say. I know. Promises, promises, promises. Another promise from a politician. I hate politicians just as much as you. But go to his website. Link is in the description. He gives flow charts on exactly what his plan is. None of this wishy-washy, I'm gonna get rid of the deep state. No, he gives you a detailed plan of what he is going to do. And why does he want to do this? To return the power to the people so that we can elect someone, and if they do something bad, we can vote them out of office. With the deep state, we can't. Now, a very important conversation comes up is how did we get here to this huge bureaucracy and this huge power that's held in non-elected officials? Watch what he said.
How did we get here? What made the American people so willing to have such a bloated administrative state?
Yeah, it was a sort of laziness in our culture. It actually started with laziness of the elected officials, right? So initially, the way it was supposed to work was the people who showed up in Congress and in the U.S. Senate, they're supposed to have the actual lawmaking authority, but also accountability. They started to get a little lazy with that accountability. These bills, get into the specifics of those details, that's a little too hard to deal with. Presidents who we elected in the White House started to similarly get lazy, saying that, the budgeting process, I'm supposed to ask Congress for permission to spend money. It's a little too complicated. Let me delegate that down. So it was sort of a dual delegation. The President of the United States started to get a little lazy. Congress started to get a little lazy. They said, let's just create this third-party apparatus, three-letter agencies, where we don't actually have to be accountable for the result because we can blame it on them if things go badly. But if things go well, we're still the people who the public knows. And I think they started attracting very attention-hungry people to those roles as well. That's what created it, is people who wanted the glory without the accountability.
Yeah.
They shunted the accountability to a third unspoken class. But then the people who actually said, okay, we're going to assume that position, they're not the people who actually needed the fame or the glory. They're the people who actually needed the exercise of power. And so in a certain way, everyone got what they needed out of the trade, right? The people who were running for elected office today, many of them just want to get on cable news on a given night of the week. Well, the same principle applied to actually the people who didn't necessarily care about getting attention, but just actually wanted to exercise raw power. And so there was a division of those who got attention, that's what they wanted, versus those who got power because that's what they wanted. And that steadied in this new equilibrium of having this administrative state that said, okay, we'll exercise all the power. You guys just get to pretend like you have it and get your dopamine hits from getting on television or getting your attention along the way.
Is this just the smartest guy you have ever heard in your life? I've always wondered this. But he explains it perfectly. Some people want fame and some people want power. It makes complete and utter sense. Now Vivek is going to go right for the throat. What does it mean to be a citizen?
But the point I was going to make was this about citizenship. Right? It's such an interesting concept to ponder. Hey, what does it mean to be a citizen? The way we think about it today, I think it's a feature of the modern moment we live in. We're taught to think about it in terms of what do I get? Right? What do I get if I'm a citizen? It's something that I go get. What do I enjoy? What does that give me? I'm going to challenge that. It may be a little bit uncomfortable, but it should be more familiar than strange. Maybe there's something else going on here with respect to citizenship that isn't entirely about, or even mostly about, what I get. Maybe citizenship is actually about obligation.
I like that a lot.
Maybe citizenship is actually about duty. Maybe that's actually what the whole thing is about in the first place, is to say that, you know what, I live in a free society that allows me, people like me, a kid of parents who came to this country as immigrants with no money in their pocket, who goes on to found multi-billion-dollar companies at the age of 37 and self-finance a presidential run by putting tens of millions of dollars of my own hard-earned money to it. That's the American dream. That's what I get. That's what I got to live. But maybe citizenship is about something else.
Yeah.
Citizenship's about duty.
Duty. Yes. In my generation, you had a duty. You had a duty to your family. You had a duty to your country. You had a duty to God if you're religious. We've lost that. Now there's a big gaping hole in an entire generation who do not feel duty bound to the United States at all. And it's created a hole. And now he's going to wrap it up in one big bow. Why do we have so many people in America who hate the United States, who hate capitalism? Why?
Can I ask a question? Yeah. Why do you think it's trendy among, I'm going to say young progressives, but maybe a lot of people, to say that, capitalism is bad? Why is there so much antipathy towards capitalism?
Yeah, I could give you a somewhat cynical and somewhat historical account here.
Okay, I'm excited.
So let's start with an old quote from, have any of you heard of Ludwig von Mises? The son of a great man can exceed his father in one of two ways. One of them is to exceed his father on his own terms, which by definition, in the thought experiment of a great man, is hard to do. The second is to exceed his father not on his own terms, but on subjective terms of moral superiority. And that one's a lot easier because that morality is subjectively defined. Yep. We're now in the middle of the largest intergenerational wealth transfer in human history, from baby boomers to millennials and Gen Z. That's what's happening right now. So there's two ways to exceed your father. One is on his own terms. That's really hard because he's already set a high bar, and that's hard work. But the other is, maybe let's just call the whole game immoral, and we're going to exceed him on morally superior terms. That's a big part of, I think, what's going on is a sort of psychic apologism as a substitute for achievement. Now, that's the cynical account. I think there are some real factors to it. I got my first job in the fall of 2007 at a hedge fund in New York City on the eve of the 2008 financial crisis.
Rough times.
Right? I mean, I ended up getting, things worked out for me, but a lot of my peers who entered the workforce at the same time are jaded and cynical, saying that, hey, it was supposed to be that if you worked hard and you did your part, that you could get ahead through your own dedication. Well, that's not the way it worked out. And so I think that there's a version of this, that the sheer timing of when many millennials, I'm 37, right? People at my age entered the workforce, they were given good reasons to be jaded because they were promised and told one thing about the American dream, and what they actually lived was another. And so for me, when I entered the workforce, 2008 financial crisis hit 6 months into my job, we had some problems. Mm-hmm. But I remember the example my parents set. Hardship is something that happens to you. It's not something you choose. But victimhood is a choice.
Yeah.
We choose to be victims. You don't choose your hardship, but you do choose victimhood. You can choose not to be a victim. And hardship is not the same thing as victimhood.
Have you ever heard any politician speak like this? Quoting Mises in one sentence and Abraham in another? And someone who boils down the troubles in this country to very basic concepts. And one of them is we have an entire generation that are lost. They don't believe that they can exceed the previous generation. So all of that anger boils down into envy and covetousness, if you can even say that word. And boiling down the very basic problem in our society, victimhood is a choice. Love it. But we're going to end out this video on his website. He has a lovely website, and we're going to look at this. Truth. We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable. Thomas Jefferson quote. God is real. There are two genders. Human flourishing requires fossil fuels. Reverse racism is racism. An open border is no border. Parents determine the education of their children. The nuclear family is the greatest form of governance known to mankind. Capitalism lifts people up from poverty. There are 3 branches of government, not 4, meaning the fourth being the bureaucracy. The U.S. Constitution is the strongest guarantor of freedoms in history. Thanks so much, guys. I will see you on the next one.